Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to be tying various knots. Going to walk you through how to tie a number of different knots. And before you ask, yes, I am the guy you go to when you need knots tied. Always have been. Expect I always will. It's a nice sort of useful skill to have. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to kick off with the most basic knot of all, really, such that it's hardly even a knot, but we do use it for some things. The overhand knot. We just take one end of the rope and go over the other, like that. This is the basis for the square knot, which we'll do next. Of course, it will be familiar as the way you start tying your shoes. And we tie our shoes with a square knot, at least we should. So a square knot is very simple. It is just two overhand knots. So we tie one overhand knot, and it's very important that we alternate the direction that we tie them. So I'm starting right over left through, and now for my second overhand knot to make the square knot, I need to go left over right, and then I'll bring that through. We can tighten that up. And you can tell you've correctly tied the square knot because it is very symmetrical. These two interlinked loops keeps it strong and it makes it easier to loosen. If you tie it incorrectly, remember we started right over left, and then if we go right over left again, you'll see the knot we get is all wonky. This is called a granny knot. It's less strong. You see, even it's pulling apart just as I pull on it there. So, starting right over left, and then we go left over right to get our nice, pretty square knot. Good for tying two ropes together like this. Also for tying our shoes, right, we would make a loop and then a second loop, and because we've started right over left, we need to go left over right with our loops, so we get a nice even square knot with our looped portions. This is less likely to come untied than if you tie a granny knot for your shoes. You probably don't necessarily make two loops, you probably just make one, but notice the same principle. Left going over right, then we tuck that loop in to get our second loop. And again, we get a square knot out of it. Always right over left, and then left over right for the square knot. Now, if you have ropes of different sizes, it can be better to tie a sheep bend, which is very similar. We'll start by making a loop with our larger rope. And then I have my thinner line, which I will bring up through the loop, around, and now you see if we went straight back down like this, we would have our square knot again. But that is less ideal for this thinner rope. We want to catch it under itself. So we make our loop, we feed our thinner line up through and around, and instead of going down through the loop, we go underneath itself where it came up. We get a little bit of that X shape where it's gone underneath itself, and then we can pull this tight, and this will be able to hold. Very simple, very similar to the square knot. Make a loop in our larger line, up through, around, and under itself on top of the thicker line, and then we can pull tight. That is our sheet bend. Now, there is an alternate or improved version of this, which we come up through, starting the same way we go around, but we just go around one more time, just to give us a little more binding action with the line before coming under and finishing the same way as we did. So exactly the same, just one extra turn around the larger line. That should give us a stronger attachment of the two. So let's see that again. We just make a loop in our larger line, bring the end of our smaller line up through, behind the loop, and then over to wrap around one more time, and then we tuck it under itself again to finish off, just like that, and we can pull this tight for an improved sheet bend. One thing you can do to step back to the square knot for just a moment, we go right over left, left over right. Now this is a sturdy knot, but what you can do at these ends to give yourself some extra reinforcement is to tie what we call a half hitch, which is really just wrapping around and going underneath itself. It's very simple. It's really like tying an overhand knot. Basically the same thing. Just go over and under itself. So this just gives a little extra block, and we can do the same thing on the other side. We're just going to go around and tuck under itself like that. We can pull that tight, and so we just have a little extra friction to support the square knot. So very simple. All you do is tie a half hitch, looping around and under on either side of your square knot. Okay. So using a similar idea and continuing with the joining of two ropes together, there's the fisherman's knot, and you would probably use this with fishing line, that's the name, but we'll look at it with this rope. What we're going to do is we have our two ends coming together here, and with each end we're going to tie an overhand knot around the other segment. So one overhand knot there, and then we come over here and we will tie a second overhand knot. And then these just can be pulled together to form our fisherman's knot. Very straightforward. again, we have our two ends. Let's start. We'll tie an overhand knot like this. And over here we'll also tie an overhand knot just around the line there. And then these can be pulled together to form our fisherman's knot. Pretty easy to undo then as well. So I'm going to set aside one rope now. We're going to look at a super useful knot. The Bowline definitely falls into the category of knots that everyone should know. And what this is going to let us do is form a loop on a line that is not going to slip. Of course, the classic described use for this is when your friend has gone down over a cliffside to get treasure out of a cave, and the adversaries after the treasure have cut the lines and left them stranded down there on the ledge, and you need to lower a rope down to them to pull them back up. You would tie a bowline, so you have a secure loop that they could use to secure themselves in that scenario. So pretty straightforward to tie a bowline. We need to form a loop. You'll see I have this piece going over the top. If you think about this end of the line coming down, we're going to form our loop here. So I've made this loop. We come up, around, and then back down through to form our bowline. And this is a nice, strong knot that is not going to slip, so you preserve your loop. Okay? Work this back out. Alright, so we're going to tie a loop in our line, this bowline. We have our end here. Let's make our loop. Now we take our end, and one way they teach this to help remember is the rabbit comes out of the hole, goes around the tree, and back down the hole, like that. And we have our bowline. Should you be the poor individual who is trapped on the ledge, and you have an incompetent associate who doesn't know how to tie a bowline knot, you can tie it yourself very easily, of course, and you can even do it one-handed. Say you're holding on for dear life. Grab the rope in your hand, cross over, twist your hand to get that loop formed, tuck the end behind, and then just pull down to get your bowline. You learn to tie it the normal way first, but like I said, you can just twist your wrist, pass it through, and pull. And you have tied the bowline around yourself, and hopefully your friend is strong, if not capable, and can pull you up. Right, so that is the bowline. People maybe think these knots aren't practical, but I just want to emphasize that they really are. So let's look at some other ways to get a loop in a rope. So the first thing we looked at was an overhand knot. And that if we double up our rope to form a loop and tie one, right, going over and then under, so our looped overhand knot, we have a simple loop in our rope. This is generally considered to be not as strong, and there is a better way, and that is to use the figure 8 knot. Now, the most basic form of figure 8 knot was with a single piece of rope. You would go over and then under and then back through this loop, and you can kind of see why it gets its name, because it looks like an 8. More typically, you would tie this as a loop or a bight. I tend to call rope loops. We form a loop, and kind of just like we did with the overhand knot, we're going to just tie the figure 8 knot with our looped rope. So we go over, behind, and then we put that loop through the loop that we've made to get our figure 8 on a bight. And this is very strong. You could loop this onto something and have a very secure attachment point for it. So, one more time, let's make our loop, bring it over the top here, go around behind, and then pass it back through our loop for the figure 8 knot. Now this presumes you can put that loop over something. Now what if you don't have the means to do that? You're trying to attach to something that doesn't have an accessible end. So I have this here, and we're going to tie a figure 8 knot to it, the loop. So the way we would do that is we start with our basic figure 8 knot, right? Go over, back, under. I'm gonna give myself a little more length to work with here. So over, back, under, right? Then we need to go through this loop. Go through the loop. Right, so there is our figure 8 knot, right? Now I can take this end, wrap it around the object, the post that I need to tie this loop to. And what I can do is now feed it back through the opposite direction to get my loop. So go through, around, tucking through. To make it easier to show you, I'm going to remove my attachment point. Right, so we make our loop. Our loop around our object. And then we feed back through our knot, around, tucking through here, and just following the path of the knot to get this back out the other end. And you see we've gotten to the same result as if we tied this on a loop to begin with. So a little trick here, right? If if we just start with the loop, we go over, behind, back through. Very simple. But if we need to tie it around something that we can't access the end of, we bring our end over, back under, go through our loop, we need enough line to go around and wind back through our knot. And then we just retrace our steps following the rope through, under, back through here, and tracing our loop around to exit the knot and finish up with our figure 8 knot. There we go. Now let's look at 2 ways to add a loop in the middle of a stretch of rope. So the first is called the Manharness hitch, which can also be called the butterfly knot. This is similar to what we're about to tie, which is what I know as the Alpine Butterfly. So it's very similar knots, similar terms. But this is what I've learned as the Manharness hitch. So we're tying a loop in a length of line. We just first make a simple loop like this. I've brought this over the other side of my line, and then I bring this over the edge of this loop. Okay, so I've sort of formed a loop that I can go through here. Grab this end and twist to get a loop in it. Okay, now we feed this loop through this one. So bring it here, pull it through, and we have our Manharness hitch. Let's do that one more time. Pretty simple. We form a loop. We bring this end over part of that loop. Our other end, we twist like this. And we're folding and sending that through this portion to get our loop. Okay? It's a nice sturdy loop. Now let's look at the Alpine Butterfly, related to Iron Butterfly, classic bands. So for this, we start by forming a loop, right? We can just grab and twist to form a loop, and then we repeat that to form a second, and we get this basically 8 shape in our rope. Now we take this loop, we're going to fold it towards us, take it around behind, and send it through the other one. Fold it over, and come back up through to form our Alpine Butterfly. Any experts in topology, let me know if this is actually the same knot as the other one. I think they're different. Alright. This one's a little harder to see. Very simple. Fold it over to form a loop. Do the same. Then we bring this loop around and back up through the other loop. this loop under this and up through here, okay? There we go, and we can just pull our loop out. And that is the Alpine Butterfly. Again, a nice sturdy loop in the middle of a rope. Okay. And let's look at a slight variation on the Bowline. This one is about ending up with 2 loops, which can be useful to create kind of a sling type effect. Again, if you were lowering a rope down to someone. So what we're going to do is start with a loop in our end, and we're basically tying the bowline with this loop, with a little bit of a twist to it. Okay? Alright, so I'm going to make a loop, and I'm going to make sure this is long enough so I have some room to work with. And let's make our loop as we did before, just doubled up. And we bring this up, and instead of going around the tree and back down the hole like we did with the single piece of line, we take this loop and we pass our looped end through and bring this up so it becomes that loop around and back down through the hole. See? So it's kind of a neat way to end up with 2 loops in the bowline. Again, so you could use these as a sling. Probably tie it with a much longer length of loop to give yourself some nice big loops. Since we're just on the desktop here, we're going a little shorter. So again, double up to get a loop. Bring this up so I get my loop here. We bring this end up through, then it loops back through, comes around behind, and this loop then forms our bowline, and we have a bowline on the Bight, ending up with 2 sturdy loops to work with. All right. So now let's switch gears and look at some knots used for attaching to a post or stake or something like that. So you'll hear these knots called hitches, and it makes sense. You're like hitching post, where you would tie things to that post, like your horse or whatever. All right, so to begin with, earlier we mentioned just the half hitch. Very simple, just going over and back through. All right, you get this little loop. Very simple. A half hitch doesn't really hold. So what we can tie is the 2 half hitches knot. So we have a rope around the thing we want to attach to, bring it over and through, so we get our first half hitch. Then we bring it over again, and then come back up through this loop. To get our 2 half hitches, and we want to make sure, see that this end is going this direction and this end is going this direction. That's what we want. We want them headed opposite ways. If they were like this, that is not what we want. So for 2 half hitches, we bring this around, come over, back through our loop, 1 half hitch down, and we bring this over and back up through, going opposite ways, and we can pull that tight. Now why that's called 2 half hitches and not hitch, I don't know. So a different hitch is the Clove Hitch, and this is often used for starting lashings, which we won't cover in this video, but maybe another one. So for the Clove Hitch, wrap around, I think we're tying to cross over, and get basically an X shape, wrap around again, and this end feeds back through, and what you get is those ropes going in opposite directions with that kind of X crossover. So this will generally hold under tension but loosens up pretty easily. It's not going to be the most tight attachment, but very easy to work with. So go over, cross over, we've got a loop around our post here, it's back under, and go through for our Clove Hitch. Now you can also tie this free of the post and put the loops on. So if I make a loop like this, and then a loop going the opposite way, like this, we fold those over and put them on here, and you'll see we get a Clove Hitch. So it's something you could tie very quickly. Flipping these loops together like this, fold it over, and you could loop it onto a post and tighten it up, and you have your Clove Hitch. There's another knot that can be done, a similar thing. Let's look at the Lark's Head, also called a cow hitch. And so for this we take a loop, wrap it around, and then we pull the other end all the way through. So we wrap the loop around, we pull the ends through. So I've switched to this smaller line so I could pull it all the way through versus these longer ropes. So very simple, but it can be done without pulling all the way through like that. Right? I can take a loop of rope, fold it over itself, right? So I get that shape. Then I fold this, right? You can already see we have the Lark's Head, and I can just loop that around the end of my bar and pull it tight. And that is our Lark's Head. Super simple, just folding it over, folding that to get our loop, and we hook that on the end. Okay, now this has a pretty cool application. If we kind of do a little extra with it, let's say we have a piece of rope, and I'm going to use this bit of smaller line, and if we start out with that lark's head, but then we do it again. So we now basically have a double lark's head. Pull that tight. What we get is called a Prusik knot, and this is cool because it won't slide under tension, but it releases very easily. So in the past, this has been used as basically an ascender knot. If you were climbing a rope, have a loop to hold on to, you could slide it up and then it will hold. You can slide it up and then it will hold. Please don't try this at home, folks, but very cool knot. Alright, so let's look at that again. Start with our lark's head, we take our loop over and we'll pull the ends through that loop. So we have our lark's head, and then we just repeat. We'll just go around again. Our ends back through our loop. You'll see we end up with basically a double lark's head, and we can pull that tight, and that'll hold tension and loosen easily. Okay, let's do 2 more knots, continuing with attaching to a post or bar, something like that. First, we're going to do the taut line hitch, and the most common use for this might be attaching to a tent stake with a line from your tent or rain fly. So we're going to start by doing a half hitch, and then we want to loop around one more time, coming up inside of this loop that we've made. So we basically have gone around the rope twice there. Now bring it to this side of this loop away from the bar, and we're going to tie an additional half hitch, but like the 2 half hitches, we want to get our ropes going opposite ways. So I'm going to bring it on this side, loop it around, and back through. Alright, so you see we basically end up with 3 loops on our line, and you'll see this piece comes out this direction and my end comes out this direction, which is what we want. And then we can pull this tight. And once tightened, it will hold tension, but it easily loosens, so you can bring out more line, and then it will hold tension again. So this is great for attaching to a tent stake, because you can hammer the stake in, tie this, and then adjust your taut line hitch to get the tension that you need. So let's tie that one more time. Made a loop around my bar, my stake. I come over the top, up through to form a half hitch. Let's do that one more time on the inside of this, closer to my bar. Okay, and then I bring this end over on outbound side of this, bring it across, loop around, and go through to make another half hitch. And you'll see we have these two pieces of rope running in opposite directions. And then I can pull this tight. Then, as we pull, it stays taut, the taut line hitch, holding tension, but is easily adjustable to hold a different length. Super handy knot for a tarp or a tent. I've tied many thousands of these in my lifetime, probably. For the last knot, I'm going to use a larger diameter tube here just because I think it'll be easier to see the knot. And we're going to tie the timber hitch. So we loop around, we'll bring this end around, and we just go right back underneath. And all we're going to do is wrap that around this rope a couple times. Just over and back through, over and back through, and then we can just pull that tight. Okay, and that is our timber hitch. Generally, we use it when starting some lashings, but it is also used because you can kind of tie it to like a log if you wanted to pull the log. Usually you'll probably add an additional loop like this and use that as your basis for pulling. Okay, so let's take another look at tying the timber hitch. We wrap our rope around our object, loop this free end around, and we're just going to tuck it underneath itself and do that a couple more times. All we're doing is wrapping this rope around itself. Very straightforward. And then we can just pull to tighten. And the tension kind of helps trap those loops under the rope. And you can pull. And if you want, add an additional loop. Interested in hauling something. Otherwise, you might start a lashing with the timber hitch. I hope that you have found this useful and have learned a few knots or refreshed your memory if you were already familiar with them. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. Good night.